Yate, greetings everyone. My name is Anna Rondon. I'll be your moderator for this evening's webinar. The public information webinar regarding DISA business deal with the Navajo Nation Environmental Protection Agency. Dooda Disa equals no DISA company on Navajo land. Next slide. Next slide. So my name's Anna Rondon. I have been home for quite a while now in Chechota. I'm Kia Ani Ado Nakaidine Bashishchi. My Ch's are Tapaha. My Nalis are Nakaidine. At this time, I want to introduce you to Windy City. Windy is a Dene tribal member from Eastern Agency. She's an educator, organizer, and environmental scientist. And we have next on our panel, Linda Williams. Linda Williams is a physicist, journalist, anti-nuclear activist, and performance artist based in Hawaii. So this is what we'll be going by for tonight's schedule. 10 minutes for the intros, Windy at City, 20 minutes, Linda Williams, 20 minutes. And then we have the Q&A feature as well. For that, we'll be having around 30 minutes for questions and answers. And you can post those in the Q&A feature. And then towards the closing, we'll have a call to action regarding a petition that we'll be getting out to folks. This presentation is being recorded. And so if, like I mentioned, have your questions posted in the Q&A and post right away so we can keep track of what the questions are going to be. Next slide. These are the key points. The reason why we started having this Dooda Disa collective 2025, there was an Eastern Navajo Agency Council looking and seeking information on the high pressure slurry ablation. There was a resolution presented by Leonard Sosi with Eastern Navajo Agency Land Commission, and also the Navajo Nation EPA Executive Director, Stephen City. They were seeking support from Eastern Navajo Agency for this project, phase 2 project, but there was really no presentation at all to the chapter officials. The resolution was very weak. It was only like a little over 30 votes in favor. However, they're still using that as support resolutions. So since then, we did different calls around our homelands to see who would be interested in helping bringing this issue to the forefront, because the community has a right to know. And we feel that there's a lot of disinformation going out to the community members as they're seeking support resolutions. So this HISPA process is extraction. It's not cleanup. And most waste remains radioactive after the extraction on site. Processed waste does not meet Navajo Nation cleanup standards. There's no site-specific environmental review. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is a generic and non-site-specific environmental assessment, which is a findings of no significant impact. And so knowing these points of concern, we felt also that the liability that's going to be left with the Navajo Nation has not been fully explained to our Navajo Nation leadership on the legislation. I think the root of our concern is the Dene Natural Resources Protection Act, which prohibits uranium mining and processing. Also, the Dene Fundamental Law, uranium is to be left in the ground. And for us as Dene people, the Tribal Council did approve uranium mining back in 1962. And now the executive branch is now looking at mining uranium waste for commercial sale. But the company, Disa, will be the ones receiving the profits. So fundamentally, we are not supposed to be transporting uranium. We as Dene people. Are we going to be fighting for another RICA amendment for the workers? Because having uranium being transported up to another Energy Fuels uranium mill site on our roads is also a very dangerous compromise. So we feel that the community people have a right to know. That's why we're doing this webinar tonight. And I just want to thank you for your patience with us, and looking forward to sharing information and learning from you as well. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Okay, I will be presenting next, so I'll be sharing some slides. And as I go through the slides, just as Anna shared, you can make notes of questions, and I'll be in that 20-minute time frame. So again, she helped introduce me. My name is Wendy City, and I work with the Southwest Research and Information Center. So thank you for today's time, and I'm just going to do an overview, some basic quick chemistry on uranium, kind of a background look at where Navajo Nation plays with this work with uranium, looking at federal ways that our landscape is working as a nation, and looking at current things of the meetings that we're able to help move into some questions that I'll be sharing next. So with that, oops, we have these two questions. One of them is, what role does the Navajo Nation EPA do and why is it a problem? And number two, who makes money? What is the commercial partnership? And so I'll bring this back at the end. But as you know, living here in the Southwest region, you have been hearing words of uranium. And so here's a map kind of showing our Four Corners region. You can see in a circle the states of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and in particular, we live with a legacy of waste, uranium waste. So we would like to look at exactly what is uranium. So looking at basics of uranium here, okay, so this is the map I was showing about the Four Corners region. Sorry about the hiccup there. And then moving to the next slide, just basics of chemistry. In Navajo, we call uranium litso. And with litso, we see it has properties. It's a heavy metal. It's radioactive naturally. And we kind of see it in three forms. And these three forms are like uranium-238, uranium-235, and uranium-234. And on some of these, you see percentages next to them, kind of like how they are here on the planet when the percentage. And why is it such a these three numbers? Because it has different isotopes. Okay, so moving forward, uranium, and you see a chemical element in the box in the corner in the periodic table. And you hear things of radioactive atoms and radioactive decay. And so basically, uranium being that property of radioactivity, it's unstable. And it, we can kind of see it like analogy of like children. They expend a lot of energy than sleep. And so radioactive atoms show this radioactive decay. But as we know, uranium, it's not going to sleep. It's like 4.5 billion years here. So um, that's one of the concerns we have. There's types of radiation, and we see one definitely by our sun, particles or waves. We see some on a second piece of radios, TVs, through non ionizing radiation. And then you see the bottom when we talk more about uranium in alpha, beta, and gamma. And so we say it's formed here on our Earth. And so looking on the left side, you see where we're underneath the Earth with magma. Volcanic ash contains small amounts of uranium, um, mixes with sediments. It gets deposited and goes back into the layers of the Earth through millions and billions of years. It goes through rain and snow recharge, and then it gets transported and gets buried in stream channels. So as you follow this arrow here, you see the minerals start to concentrate, the uranium, and when organic matter is present, and oxygen is low, so you have this accumulation there. So when removed from the Earth, uranium is oxidized, and we have these other areas of solubility and not solubility. So basically, can it dissolve? And we have these features of uranium +4, which is insoluble, uranium +6, which is not, which is highly soluble, and the arrow of stream channels here with the transport as it's going down. So we go back to us here in the Four Corners. So we see back in 1944 and 1989, where we get 30 million tons of uranium extracted here on the Earth, or within our Navajo Nation. And so it left a large legacy, polluted lands, water, and adverse economic, environmental, and human health effects on the Navajo Nation and its people. And so we go with these laws here of the Navajo Nation energy policy that was created in 1980, but it had an amendment where it added Section 1101 for uranium mining and nuclear power generation. And then over 20 years later, we get our Diné Fundamental Law. And Anna was sharing that in the beginning, where basically we help our Mother Earth and Father Sky and don't undo the balance. And then we get the Diné Natural Resource Protection Act in 2005, which made a moratorium on no uranium mining extraction. In that same time, we got our Navajo Nation EPA being able to use CERCLA to help with this work. And then in 2012, we get a Radioactive Material Transportation Act. So that was no transport uranium, but an amendment happened in August 29th, 2024, where we'll share more what this change made. So we look at the Navajo tribal government. They got responsibilities for uranium issues, and we see for here, Navajo Nation EPA, Navajo Abandoned Mine Lands, Reclamation Uranium Mills, Tailing Remedial Action Department, and Navajo Nation Department of Justice, and Navajo Nation Department of Health. And then we have advisory committees, and these advisory committees host meetings here on the Navajo Nation. First one is the Uranium Mediation Advisory Commission, and then we have a Navajo Council Resource and Development Committee and the Eastern Navajo Land Commission. So the last two are made up of council delegates, and Durack, the first one there, is made up of community members. And this year they were able to fulfill all their seats. So looking at all those pieces, we work with the federal government, and multiple agencies came together and they go through plans. And so it went through called a 5-year plan, and then another 5-year plan, and then a 10-year plan. So in that sense, you had multiple agencies coming together to address uranium contamination. And those agencies are listed as EPA, BIA, BLM, DOE, NRC, IHS, and ATSDR. And so a lot of planning goes here, and we're currently within the last part, which is a 10-year plan that ends in 2029. So here is a picture of kind of the process they go through when they're looking through Superfund on the Navajo Nation. And this was taken from their 10-year plan. So you can see these sections and colors. They usually display these as maps or diagrams when they're presenting to the community. So this first gray area is assessment, and you can see under there the areas that go underneath that. The second part's decision making, um, the parts that go there, and then cleanup, and then you end with operations and maintenance. And so it is a long-term plan, and so this is available online as a report. So in the last 4 years, we see here just kind of some things that got highlighted. And so in the first part of looking back 4 years ago, we look at 2022, which is DISA. They performed a phase 1 study and they looked at 3 sites on the Navajo Nation. A year later, they were able to give a report to that phase study. And I highlighted in orange or this dark brown color here, areas that pertain to some big movement that happened in our tribe in 2024, which is transportation of uranium. And that was between the Pinyon Plain Mine from Energy Fuels over to Utah, around Bluff, Utah. And we call that Energy Fuel Mill. And so they were transporting uranium ore through the highways on the Navajo Nation. And so a pause happened immediately, and communities were sharing their concern and held protests and questions to our tribal leadership. And so an amendment that late fall, as you can see here in August 29th, 2024, there was an amendment. So it was able to say now we can transport mine waste. And one last piece of kind of closing this up, there was an agreement made, and this agreement, we just never really know what the contents of it is. So we have to wait for that. But this was between Energy Fuels and the Navajo Nation. But there was some, like, I think $1 million contracted between both, and some other areas that we just don't quite have a clear understanding of, but this will help. This is there. So the rest of this part, looking at the two, when I started with talking about DISA here, we come back to it at the end of fall this last year. And so currently there is a signed contract with DISA for phase 2 verification study that happened in fall. The license for DISA got approved from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they're currently on track for doing a time critical removal action. And this is at the Old Church Rock mine. I put in blue here, kind of just highlighting some areas that I'll bring back at the end. But in 2024, an executive order was signed by the president, and there was some movement of some new funding for environmental remediation fund. So the time critical removal action, it is worked with the EPA Region 9, and is basically to remove old waste at the Old Church Rock mine. And it's called this because it was just as part of a plan, and they have areas of concern. And so these areas of concern, they remove these waste from the areas, and they put it into something called a Pond 4. And it's through that Pond 4 that DISA will use that high pressure slurry ablation to look at this 8,000 cubic feet or cubic yards of waste. And so I'm seeing this as a phase 2 verification study. And that's like looking at spring to have that happen. So those movements of DISA with HPSA is there, but at the same time, federally, we're looking at things with fast track of 41 projects. You may have heard some mines with Crown Point Church Rock, with ISL Mining, La Jera Mesa, which is based on Mount Taylor, and looking at deep underground ISL projects. And then we got some maps here to give some of these locations, but you can find them in the website of Laramie and in the reports to see a better detailed map of this. But at the same time, we hear this other mine called Roca Honda. It's not on a Fast 41, but it's called Transparency Project. And it's a conventional underground mine. And this map kind of highlights where Roca Honda is at with this top arrow in the yellow, where Mount Taylor is at. You can see Roca Honda there. And then on the bottom arrow, you can see La Hera Mesa. So they're sitting on the base of Mount Taylor, and Mount Taylor is this outlined in the orange, and Mount Taylor is by grants. And it's considered a sacred mountain to the Navajo and to local tribal members that share that land. So trying to see where pieces are fitting together. There has been some recent meetings, as I said, with part of those commissions at work from Direct, Eastern Navajo Land, RDC. And so in such meetings, the director shares there's revenues that can happen to the Navajo Nation when we sell the ablated mine waste to Energy Fuels Mill. And they're citing 2,000 tons, but we kind of question, wasn't there a ban? Does this go against what DNRPA is, the Natural Resource Protection Act, and uranium mining and processing? Other areas that come up a lot is, well, the price of uranium is going up, but it hasn't really went. And does that mean we got to warrant spending tens of millions of dollars to build these new mines for that? Our new president administration wants to generate its own supply of critical minerals and uranium. So Navajo Nation is looking at, is it expecting possible federal executive orders encouraging this, the recovery of uranium and critical minerals from AUM waste? So it's really vague to kind of like see what's happening here, because at the same time it's coming back to these questions. So we know the Navajo Nation Environmental EPA is a small staff, and they have some budget cuts. And who's making money? We're hearing the names of New Fuels, Energy Fuels, Disa, and they're the ones that own the High Pressure Slurry Ablation. So it's concerning to see where is this all going, and why isn't this communicated better to the communities? And I share these pieces because we kind of look at these recommendations. So I mentioned before this phase 2. What does DISA label as a phase 2 ablation pilot study? Is it the old Church Rock mine? As it's only 8,000 cubic yards, because I thought when hearing about phase 2 is supposed to be a larger scale. And then there's some possible actions that we can recommend for Dooda Disa to look at the contract that was signed in the fall with DISA, and to get clarity of what disagreement happened between the Pinion Plain Mine and Energy Fuels Mill, and where's the funds coming from that made the media of 2 million, then it's 3 million. And so we look at Durac, who works with our communities and talks with the OPVP and council delegates. What's the status of development of Navajo remediation standards? Because when DISA looked at that report that came out in 2023, it was citing from Tetra Tech such standards is not developed by the Navajo Nation. Then we get Dooda Disa request to be placed on the agenda. So there's a next direct meeting happening in February. And so we encourage being introduced to that. And then I bring it back to that slide when I had 4 years, because this executive order 4-2023, it had a part in there on one saying Navajo tribal government agencies to work with chapters and community organizations, and 2, to work with Navajo Nation Council. So has this executive order been followed? So when you reread through that, I see transparency, communication, some areas of that need to be strengthened here with our tribal government in the communities. So that's what I'd like to share today. Yeah.
Yes, 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 you will. It's very informative. And the delivery it's not so alarming. And I like how it's being presented. I'm so proud of you. Thank you for sharing. And next we have Linda Williams.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can you see it okay? Looking for, yeah,
Yes.
thank you. All right. Aloha, everybody. I am here in beautiful Hilo, Hawaii, in the Kingdom of Hawaii, illegally occupied by the United States military. I'm a physicist with the group Nuclear Free Hawaii. The island that I live on, the island of Hawaii, is a nuclear free zone, and local activists have worked on that for many, many years, and hopefully that will become a standard for the entire island chain. So what I'm going to do today is argue that HIPSA is extraction, not cleanup, based on science and facts. So what is it? What environmental review did they do? What's the license imply? So just repeating a lot about what Wendy said. I just need to move this menu bar out of the way so I can see my slide. Oh, that was wrong. Hold on. Okay. So, sorry, give me a second here. Oops. All right. There's a menu bar. I can't get out of the way. I can't read my slides, but it's okay. So here's two plots showing all the abandoned uranium mines. So after the Cold War and after the nuclear power boom went bust, companies just walked away and left the uranium mines. And so there's over 500 on the Navajo Nation and over 15,000 nationwide. Tens of millions of tons of waste rock remain that are radioactive and toxic. Much of the waste was never sent to the mill. It was just left because it was low grade or it was just abandoned. So it's left at pits, portals, piles. I'll show you some pictures in a moment. Who abandoned the mines? Well, private uranium mining companies just abandoned them when it went bust. Cold War, Department of Energy, Department of Defense abandoned the mines. So they were closed without reclamation. And again, many operators dissolved or were sold or went bankrupt. Who deals with them now? So on the federal scale, there's the EPA, who has a Superfund requirements to clean them up. There's the Department of Energy that deals primarily with the uranium mining and mill sites that were used during the Cold War for nuclear weapons. And then, of course, the Navajo Nation EPA is the regulatory authority on Navajo land. And I just want to point out in the US map, you can see the concentration of the mines in the West, because that's the license that was given to DISA is for 14 states, and that's primarily in those regions. Oops. Oh, okay. So what is mine waste? Well, it's radioactive. So the uranium was dug up and you've got waste rock, exposed ore. It could be chunks, it could be water, it could be soil and sediment. And here's some pictures from different abandoned mines. The uranium mine in Cameron on the Navajo Nation at the top, and then the Ruby One mine in Church Rock in New Mexico. And you can see how they have different compositions. The different radioactive elements that are there are not just uranium. Uranium decays into thorium and then to radium and radon, and all those elements are present in the soil rock waste. All of these elements have different half-lives, so they are present for different amounts of time. The shorter the half-life, the more active, the more dangerous those elements are. The radiation caused by uranium and its alpha decay is very long-lived. Radium is a generator because it's a fast decayer, has high gamma doses, and gamma radiation is very high energy rays of light that can have very dangerous biotoxic consequences. And then, of course, radon is a gas that can be inhaled. Concentrations now, you might, different ways of measuring radioactivity are given in, like exposure, activity, REMS, sieverts, all that. Well, for mine waste, it's given mostly in concentration. So for example, if you went out into the desert, the background amount of concentration of uranium is about 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram. So my analogy that I came up with is if you have a loaf of raisin bread, then that would be a kilogram. 1 raisin is a gram, and then 1 grain of salt or sand in the bread would be a milligram. So it's a millionth of a kilogram is what it is. So it's a little bit, it's not, doesn't seem very significant, but these radioisotopes are very toxic. So a little goes a long way. So the DISA-HIPSA process, which I'm going to go into great detail about coming up, removes the soil mass only. It can't remove radium. It doesn't remove decay products. It concentrates uranium and removes that, but the soil that remains afterwards is still radioactive. And just to give you an example of the decay chain, this is the decay chain. You have uranium at the top, and its half-life is 4.5 billion years, the age of the Earth, which I always think is very interesting. And then the different products that are formed, the decay products. So anytime you have uranium, you have all these other decay products in some kind of concentration. So DISA only removes the uranium. Important concept. The different exposure pathways from abandoned uranium mines, or AUMs, can come from airborne dust, from gamma radiation, from radon gas, radium. You have contaminated water. It can leach into the water. You have soil ingestion. So these are chronic multi-pathway exposures that happen not only to humans, but to livestock, to animals, to plants. And then those get in the food chain and are spread around. The biological impacts from exposure to radioactive isotopes can be catastrophic, and it can also take time. So it might not be, the exposure may be latent in that it doesn't show up, until the next generation. So, but immediately you can have prompt effects that can lead to cancer risk, kidney toxicity, immune impacts, et cetera, that are long-term. So, who operates and guides all this? So federal law, as Wendy already spoke about, most abandoned uranium mines are addressed under CERCLA, which is Superfund. And there is a responsibility from the DOE and the EPA to clean up these sites. What's the criteria for what's considered a cleanup? Well, EPA has a really bad guide for what's considered cleanup. So they do it in terms of lifetime cancer risk. So if 1 additional cancer per 10,000 or 1 million people, that's considered remediated. But this is a whole nother conversation we could have another time, but that risk assessment is fundamentally problematic and faulty. It's very biased. It's based upon a standard man, not children or animals or women or pregnant women, or external versus internal. So it's as a physicist who's taught this for over 20 years, I think that this kind of risk assessment is absolutely inadequate. And you can just go by the guideline that more exposure is worse. That's, it doesn't take a large quantity of radioactive substances to have catastrophic biological effects. So anyway. Now, the Navajo Nation, on the other hand, and also all these documents that we're looking at today, the way that they approach cleanup is in terms of concentration of uranium. So what they talk about is milligrams to kilograms. So that would be how many grains of sand or salt per loaf of bread, right? Just to give you a sense. So the number that's used in the Tetra Tech study that Wendy mentioned, and I'll go into more details momentarily, is 3.2 milligrams per kilogram. And like I said already, what's considered background or normal natural, if you go out into the desert in Navajo lands and scoop out some dirt, you would find 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram of uranium. So the key difference between EPA and Navajo Nation is the way that they express the risk or whether it's clean or not. So we're going to just go with the milligrams per kilograms. So what happened before DISA, this new, how have the mines been cleaned up so far? Well, as far as what I could understand from researching this is that not many of the 500, over 500 mines have been mediated or remediated or cleaned up. Only a few have, and 46 have been identified as priorities. Of course, Church Rock is a top priority. So how do they get rid of it? They scoop it up, they move it, they excavate, consolidate, they can cap it, they can cover it. And as we've seen in Church Rock area, the Cuerva mine, which I have up on the right-hand side, is not holding. So there's about 1 million cubic yards sitting at the bottom of this steep ravine. And I've walked on that thing. You can actually go in and just walk on it. And it's just capped with dirt. So now people are trying to figure out where to move it, right? Are you going to cap it in place? Or are you going to move it to another location? And I know this is a huge cause of, discussion, debate amongst the people in the Navajo and the Diné community. So if you don't cap it properly, then you end up with just forever waste, like forever minerals or forever chemicals that you have to just move again. So this way of cleaning up the waste is very costly. It's very expensive. It takes a long time. And you have to perhaps move it to one place and then move it again. And it really isn't a solution long-term. So some examples for remediated or actively remediated sites right now is the Northeast Church Rock mine and the whole Church Rock mining district that I have shown in the map. So here comes DISA. So DISA is a brand new company. It's only been around since early 2020s. It's two guys from California who came up with this technology, which actually is, from a technological perspective, pretty clever. And it's a mechanical method of concentrating uranium from the waste. I still don't consider it cleanup. I consider it extraction. But as a scientist, I have to say that the technology is pretty clever. So what they do is they go to a site and they crush the rocks. They have to crush it into a fine dirt and then add water and make a slurry, which is just wet mud. Okay. Then you blast it through these high pressure nozzles and smash them together. I have an animation to show that to you in a moment. But I want to point out that these have to be powered by diesel or gas generation. So anytime you have generators on site, especially away from cities or in the country, in rural areas, you have a risk of spill and contamination from those generators themselves. So they have to bring in gas and diesel. They have to bring in the water to make the slurry. So all that has to be brought in. Then you have particle collisions of the slurry that break up the uranium and concentrate them into what's called fines, because it's fine, I guess is why they call it that. And then what's called coarse material, which is still containing uranium, is left on site. So let me show you, here's an animation from DISA, showing an animation of the process.
DIPSA is different. It's a disruptive yet complementary technology that uses high-velocity slurry jets to create controlled particle-on-particle collisions, liberating minerals through hydrodynamic shear and abrasion rather than brute force. The result? Cleaner mineral surfaces, reduced overgrinding, and significantly improved liberation without increasing energy consumption.
Okay, so in this picture here, these brown little chunks are like the fines. And so it turns out that uranium likes to collect on these smaller pieces. And so that's how they concentrate it. So this is kind of low tech. There's no chemicals, it's just water. And then what they do is they'll use mesh in order to filter it out. So like metal mesh filters to collect the smaller pieces, which are the fines that have increased concentration. And then the larger chunks that are left behind will be dewatered. They have to dehydrate them, take the water out, and then they are left on site. So let me show you some of the results from the study. So in 2022, the EPA hired Tetra Tech, which is a huge national company. It's an international company that does tests like this. And I'll just mention, because Anna asked me to mention, there was a case where they were doing a test in San Francisco at the one of the sites where they process the ship's that were blown up in the Marshall Islands when they were testing nuclear bombs. And the company was found guilty. 2 people were found guilty of falsifying, dosimeter or radioactive measurements. And they were found guilty of felonies and served jail time. But the company still is granted, grants to do studies because it was such a small number of people versus their whole operation that they figured that it wasn't significant enough. So, I mean, they do have a history of fraud. Anyway, so in 2023, they did what's called bench tests. So they had a very small system for the phase 1 test. And they went to Old Church Rock Mine, Quivira Church Rock Mine, and Cove Transfer Station. They only processed 2 5-gallon buckets of rock. Okay, so about 100 pounds per test, which is, so they grabbed 2 5-gallon buckets and they processed it for 4 minutes, 8 minutes, and 30 minutes. And that's it. That's all the testing they did. And what they found from those tests is that 20 to 24% of the total mass becomes those fines. So that's very high concentrate of uranium. Now that's removed. And it can be removed from the site to be buried, or it can go be sold at the mill, which is probably what they're going to do. And then 76 to 80% of the total mass of the rock remains on site as a coarse fraction with low uranium concentration, but with other radioactive isotopes as well. So this is the result of that test that everything else is based upon. The important results of these tests is that they found that HIPSA technology did not achieve site-specific Navajo residential cleanup goals for uranium. That's the results of the test. You can read it yourself in the document. And just to give you a sense of where that comes from in terms of the numbers, again, like untreated waste that you would just go find at an abandoned uranium mine could have a concentration of uranium that's anywhere from 200 to 3,000 milligrams of uranium per kilogram of rock. So what does that mean? Again, remember, the milligram is the sand to the loaf of bread, right? So 3,000 milligrams of uranium per kilogram, that's considered sellable. That's high grade ore. So the range is because some is low grade and some is higher grade. So after the process, they can increase the low grade up to 1,000 milligrams per kilogram or more. So that's considered low grade ore, but it's still sellable, So White Mesa Mill in Utah, that's owned by Energy Fuels, could buy it and then make yellow cake out of it that then could be put into the fuel cycle for nuclear power or nuclear weapons. So that coarse fraction that's left behind, what they found in the study is 5 to 50 milligrams per kilograms. Okay, so that still seems like a little bit, but guess what? The Navajo Nation cleanup standards, as they are right now, is 3.2 milligrams per kilogram. So it admits in the test that HIPSA technology did not achieve cleanup. Yet we hear it being called cleanup all the time. So unless the Navajo Nation changes what the cleanup standards are, then this technology will not meet it. You can't just run it over and over again and run it longer and like get it cleaner. It doesn't work that way. So I would be like very concerned. I'm very concerned that if there's a push for this, that there might be an attempt to reclassify what's considered cleanup, which is happening on the national level. They're reclassifying what's considered radioactive waste risk, not waste, but just risk. So that they can accommodate this technology. So in my book, uranium extraction is not radiation remediation. So just a couple more slides here. After they did the test, then the NRC did an environmental review. So for example, just to tell you a little bit about the environmental process. So if I want to have a uranium mine, I go to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to get a license. So to get the license, I have to have environmental review. If I want to have a rocket launch pad like Elon Musk, I go to the FAA and I get the license and they do the review. So NRC does the review, and they did what's called an EA, an environmental assessment, which is the weakest form of assessment you can do. It is essentially a best case scenario assessment. It's only a few hundred pages instead of thousands. instead of doing a more in-depth EIS, which is an environmental impact study, which this kind of project really, really needs. They didn't do that. So August 2025, they released the EA. They give a 30-day public comment period, and they're supposed to do their due diligence to announce this, to include stakeholders and community organizations. And I don't remember seeing it. I didn't give public comment on it. So perhaps many of the friends in the audience tonight did participate in that. But, often these agencies don't do due diligence. They just put it in the Federal Register, and it's kind of up to you to figure it out. So that public comment period closed, and within the month, they turn around and they issue the final EA, and at the same day, which is very, not common, a finding of no significant impact. And that finding of no significant impact are called the FONSI. They didn't look at groundwater. They didn't look at cumulative impacts. They just assumed everybody would pursue best practices and comply with regulation. There was no site-specific environmental review. And this time period turnaround is unprecedented. So I've worked on several different environmental reviews before, and it's typically, at least a year between draft and final. So they're just accelerating this for Trump's push, and Biden's as well. This really started with Biden, the push for the nuclear renaissance. So very unsatisfying. So then the next day, the NRC grants the license, and the license, it's a material license. It's a generic source material license, which means it's generic. It's not site specific. It allows HIPSA to operate as a mobile, multi-site activity that can possess, process, concentrate, and ship uranium contaminated material off-site. It's my understanding, although I'm not a lawyer, that once it's in the possession of Disa, it's theirs to sell and do with what they want. Although we don't know what the deal is the Navajo Nation made with them. So who knows? The license applies for 14 states where most of the abandoned uranium mines are and where there's more uranium. And so the one contention, or the one, not contention, but the one aspect of the license that is the most significant is that before they can operate at any site, they have to submit a 90-day pre-mobilization notification, a PMN, to the NRC that's site specific. So say, for example, Disa wants to have phase 2 at Church Rock, one of the sites there. They have to submit something to the NRC for review. They'll make sure that it's in compliance with the environmental assessment and the FONSI that they gave, and look at the Endangered Species Act and 106 review. So that's a point of, we don't know that whether or not they're required to announce that to the public, whether the Navajo Nation plans to announce that to the public, or whether they just do it, in secret. So that's a huge point that I would try to find more information about with the Navajo Nation. So what's next? This is a picture of what it would look like at a site, perhaps. The top lump of the top pile would be like the waste. And then this is the machine, the blue machine. Although here's the thing about the environmental review and the license doesn't say anything about phase 2. We don't know how large the next scale up will be, or how many, tons of waste they plan to process. So this is just a picture they have on their website, and what they're going to do about it. So in conclusion, I just want to say, I want to quote what Stephen at City said in the Gallup Independent Guest column of December 31st. So this is quoting him: HIPSA removes contaminants, leaves a clean coarse material that can stay on site as clean soil. I'm sorry, that's false. HIPSA treated material did not meet Navajo Nation residential cleanup standards for uranium, and it doesn't treat other radioactive contaminants. So I'm sorry, Mr. at City, that's false. He furthermore claims in that article the treatment can reduce disposal volumes by up to 2/3, 3/4. I don't know where he's getting that from, because we saw in the results of that test by Tetra Tech, test shows removal of 20 to 24% as fines, and the rest is left. That's 1/4, not 3/4. So I don't know where that's coming from. And finally, he says the determination that it's safe came after the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission completed years of federal review, public notice, opportunity for engagement, and a public comment period. Well, yeah, but it wasn't good enough. So the environmental review for this project went from draft to final in less than 2 months, which is not years of review, and did not allow for adequate time for public review or participation, especially because no one's ever seen anything they're talking about, right? We haven't seen the contract. We haven't seen any agreement or what they're planning to do. And finally, he says, Disa Technologies is a service provider. It does not receive revenue from uranium recovery. Any future resource recovery plans would be guided by Navajo law. Well, Disa Technologies just made a contract. They made a binding agreement with Thor Energy. Thor Energy owns and many abandoned uranium mines in Colorado. So they made a deal. This is a headline from an article from October. Thor Energy waste agreement could lead to recovery of saleable uranium. I can guarantee Disa is not in this game to be a out of the goodness of their heart, cleaning up uranium waste for not profit. This is a for-profit company. They have investors that want to see returns, and it's very clear that they're in this for money. So I would just say by conclusion, HPSA is extraction and not cleanup. Mahalo. I look forward to your questions. Okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Linda. Thank you for the research and giving us some recommendations as well. Yeah, ask your questions live by using the raise hand feature, or write your questions in the chat, or submit your questions on the Q&A feature. So we are ready for questions from the audience, and thank you for your kind patience. Any hands raised?
All right, we have one hand raised from Mervin. I am going to go ahead and allow them to talk.
Greetings, Mervin, Yate. Mervin, you have the floor now. We don't. Any other questions? And we'll try and see if Mervin can get on. Any other raised hands? Oh, anonymous attendee. With Navajo EPA recently allowing waste shipment across Navajo Nation, how do community members maintain trust in their representatives when it comes to advocating for their rights and health? Wendy, would you like to respond to that question?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a very important question. As we just learned, as far as an agency that is making decisions with the tribe on uranium laws, Navajo Nation EPA is very important in this part. But and looking at community members maintaining their trust, I think that's where you reaching out to your representatives. On some of the meetings, it really is hard to find when they're happening. And I think if things were kind of easier to find, and that might help to get your representative there to get updated, because the direct meetings this last year have been going from region to region or agency to agency and sharing updates of what's going on in the area. And those are important as they bring their staff on and they share those presentations. But at the same time, there's time to ask questions, and that's where as direct, helps talk to the OPVP and the council.
Mhm.
They can be that area of getting that across, because with Durac, their purpose, they've been made in 2015, and they're made to study and reach conclusions about impacts uranium mining and uranium processing on the tribal lands, and they make those recommendations for policies, laws, and regulations to address those impacts. So they did recently move down from 11 to 7 members, and recently in 2025, they elected those members to the commission there. And so yeah, attend and be present, and definitely share you're not hearing what's happening and you want to know more. You can add
Right.
others to it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Yes, getting involved. We will be sending out other related information regarding on what folks can do later towards the end of the session. There's another question that says, are there any other nations that DISA has been able to sell ablation to? If so, how are they doing?
I can try to answer that, but
Okay, Linda.
oh, sorry, I don't know how you're doing this. Um, not that I know of. It is such a new technology that they're in the phase one with everybody. So no, someone asked if it's, yeah, no, that's as far as I know. Wendy, I don't know if you, my understanding is they're phase one right now with everyone.
Yeah, phase one, because phase two hasn't happened, and an ablation process itself was used in mining, but this is using this as the first attempt with their high pressure slurry with uranium waste. So it's I think everyone's learning from it. So it's still, I think, considered experimental.
Also, they're using it for other extraction, not just uranium, but copper. Think of all the mines all over the world that have waste. So if they can, extract even low grade, or they can try to suck as much money out of it as possible.
We got another question for Linda. Your point by argument was great. It needs to get out. She asked also, did folks write back to the paper challenging Steve at City's claims?
Yeah, I wrote that we did write a response. Anna and I did. And the first article that came out, when was that? Back in November, we wrote back and they published our response. But this most recent one, we wrote a great response, like kind of question by question, issue by claim. I don't know if they've published it or not because they're behind a paywall. So
No, they didn't publish that one.
yeah.
Okay, another question. It was mentioned that a handful of soil on the Navajo Nation contains 1 to 3 milligrams of uranium. Is that for all Navajo Nation or just areas around the abandoned uranium mines?
Well, I said that, so I would, clearly that's not everywhere. And I know folks in the room probably know more about this than I do, but I know the way that they did aerial, they went in airplanes with Geiger counters and tried to find regions that had higher activity to locate, to prospect. So of course that's not going to be everywhere, but that's sort of like if you have a Geiger counter and you measure the background radiation just anywhere in the air, you get a certain background level, and that's just kind of an average. So it could be more or it could be less, but that like 1 milligram, 1 to 3 milligrams of uranium per kilogram is considered not a risk, I suppose, is what that standard means.
Another question, is DISA also tracking environmental or human health exposures since they are still in an experimental phase 1? That's the question.
Wendy, you want?
Well, I know with the first report, it was over 100 pages, and I think out of anything, you always want to, check everything that you don't want to attempt to disturb. And I don't quite think of that part there, but I think it's they're looking through that, but I don't know that part. But
Okay. Another question. Thanks to all the presenters. Does anyone know when and how DISA is going to apply for their permit for water? Because we need to oppose that. Or are they trucking in? And if so, whose water rights are they using? This is from Sarah from Amigos Bravos. Yay, Sarah.
Oh, well, I'll just say that the process for the license is that when they pick a place that they want to do phase two, then they apply to the NRC with that 90-day application where they have to show that they're in compliance with the environmental review that was given. And I imagine at that time they would, apply for water. So for the tests that were done at the 3 sites, they brought it in on trucks. So they'll truck it in, I guess.
What is the current position of the response of the Office of the President and Vice President of the Navajo Nation and the Navajo Nation Council?
well, I know they were making presentations to some of the members of RDC, and that was a few years ago with this HIPSA technology, and they did make a video sharing kind of like their thoughts of it. But this was at that first phase, which was the really small amounts, and nothing to a commercial size to the amount of mine waste that's here on Navajo Nation. But regarding the position, there was a recent press release, I think it was this last week, where the director of the Navajo Nation EPA and Mr. Nygren made it to DC, and they were sharing some areas of other topics with legislation, but they did mention some areas of the uranium. So I think it's that shows that, but you can find it on their Facebook with that press release.
Yeah, it's really critical. Thank you for that question, Mervin. Will there be public warnings to notify the people of the area indicating a cleanup day? High winds, airborne, more education needed for the people. Thank you for the information. Aaron Brockovich, it. Yes,
Yeah.
Sherry from Zoom. Thank you. Exactly.
Well, with the time critical removal part, that is with the area of the old Church Rock mine, and then again that's only 8,000 cubic yards. But to be to that next level of commercial scale, I don't know their process of how they're going to be working with the community as they accompany themselves with DISA and Navajo Nation EPA.
Yeah, great recommendations. Do you have any recommendations of reading materials or resources to become familiar with the legal history of uranium mining on the Navajo Nation? If You Poison Us is one book that we know of. And there's one, Yellow Dirt, I believe it's called. Those are kind of recent. But really good films is The River That Harms is really good too. That's filmed back in 87, I believe. But if you go to Southwest Research Information Center, shric.org, not the cartoon character, but SRIC.org, they have a ton of information, a repository of all the work since the 40s.
That's a great
Yes,
resource.
so
Yeah, the website
yes.
got updated, but those archives are still there.
Oh, good. Yes. Yes, so for the community to rally around this issue, it's really important that more public information. That's why we're doing this, is to sound the alarm that this is a scheme and a scam. Mr. At City is not even a scientist. He has no background in environmental issues. So there are some very questionable ways that they're doing business behind the scenes, which seems to be the trend these days. So we also wanted to recognize other communities and organizations have been working on this project for about 3 years. And this is just one webinar. We're going to be having several webinars. So are there any other questions?
Yeah. Ace Hoffman has two questions that I
Okay.
said I was going to answer. So Ace, can the waste be put back into the mines? Would that be any use if it can be? And I mean, my understanding is that it's the exception that can happen because they're not geologically safe or they've been closed already. So that's not really an option. And then you also asked Ace if, is the fine enough to be easily inhaled? Absolutely. So they're micrograms. And so it's very dangerous. They have to be contained in containers when they're shipped. It's not like they're going to put it in the back of a truck and cover it like they do with the uranium ore that's being shipped from, the mine to the mill. So they'll have to be very carefully handled. And that's one of the issues that I think warranted an environmental impact study rather than just an EA, because there is so much potential danger. If something happened and the fines got released in the atmosphere, then that would be super dangerous. Yeah. Oh, Kale Walker asks, what about the water from the slurry? Did anybody answer that yet?
Mm-mm.
Um, they dehydrate everything, or they de-water it. And so the proposal, of course, none of this has been done to scale, is that the water from the slurry will just go back into the machine and it'll be a closed cycle and it won't need much water. But Stephen at City said in one of the earlier articles that were in the Gallup Independent that the water would be sprayed on the ground. I don't know, you guys remember that? And that it would be, essentially clean, but that's not part. So for the EA, they do the best case scenario. So if the company says it's going to be a closed system and it's just going to recycle, and they don't have to examine what if it doesn't recycle, because you only have to do the best case scenario. So if you do an EIS, you have to do the worst case scenarios. That's why you should always have to prove no harm, right? The burden of proof should be doing no harm, not doing harm. So that's the problem with this whole process, is that communities and the public are forced to prove harm instead of the companies proving no harm for something like radioactivity that is statistical in nature and is almost impossible to prove anything because of the random nature of decay. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that.
Wow. There's a question. If you cook food in the ground, will the food contain radiation because of the soil containing uranium? That's a good question.
It depends where it's at, right? If you're cooking in the ground next to an abandoned uranium mine.
Yeah, it depends on location, I would think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But those are really good questions.
Yeah.
And I just want to share a little story from a family in Smith Lake where there's a uranium, abandoned uranium mine there. And she was an intern for us, for our institute. And she said that she never thought that a couple of years ago that they would be burying her grandma and grandpa in waste tailing, uranium mine waste, burying them. So there's stories that we don't know about that the community are not having the opportunity to share throughout the Navajo Nation. But I just want to, oh, uranium in the repository system is very deadly.
Respiratory. Yeah.
Teresita. Terry, you want to go online and talk? Would love to hear from you. There's
Can I say, I'll say something while she's getting on, if you don't mind. What she's
Okay.
saying is absolutely correct. So remember, the concentrations that we're talking about are milligrams per kilogram. But if you inhale a microgram, which is a billionth of a kilogram, that's enough in lodges in your lungs. That's enough to cause cancer. That's, 1 microgram. So it's very dangerous if you inhale it.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Terry.
So, I don't know what you guys want to hear, but I was just reading some of the comments and talking about cooking with food, but even with the wood that you gathered, if it was near a mining area or downwind or even downstream, the root system could have taken up some of that uranium waste and is basically in the wood as well. And so cooking with that, you're heating it up and you're allowing it to go into the atmosphere and go into your food. And so this is the reason why we as a community try to explain how in our Navajo traditional ways, we don't separate ourselves, and the same thing goes for how the environment works. And so that's something that we always need to mention and keep people in the loop of those type of questions, that just because it only you can see the effects from somebody when they talk about it, it doesn't mean that it's not there. Just like we can't see radon, we can't see the radiation effects. And so we have to keep in mind that the impacts are real, even though we can't see it. It's impacting our respiratory system. It's impacting our mind, because once our health is going through everything that it's going through after the fact of the mining industry, it affects us mentally. Our mental health starts to go. We become depressed. We become people that we don't recognize any longer. And those are detrimental things that happen not only with the physical health, but it affects our mental health. We no longer can practice our spirituality, our traditional ways, because of the uranium impact as well on the land, on the atmosphere, on the water, the soil. Everything is impacted. And that's one of the reasons why we have to always remind people that we're part of the land. And it's hard for people to understand that sometimes, because they don't see it. They don't see that we're part of the land, but we are actually tied to the land, not just spiritually, but physically. A lot of my community members that are from the Church Rock area have their umbilical cords buried in those locations and are impacted by that, by the uranium industry, just because it started out there after the community had already established its living place in the area. And so those are things that we need to keep in mind and always mention when we're talking about the lives and the homes that we're talking about in different locations. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions for me.
Yeah, while she's here, it's a rare opportunity to have Terry here. She's at ground zero. Yeah, very intelligent. She's almost like a community scientist now, watching her grow all these years.
Yeah, so I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Teresita Kiana, and I do come from the Redwater Pond Road community, and I do sit on the executive board for the Community Association, the grassroots organization that was established in 2006.
Yes. Shiaja. We look forward to collaborating because I believe the next webinar is going to be with your community and with Chris Shuey. But yeah, thank you again for chiming in. It's so important. And that's the reason why we want to be behind the community members and providing technical assistance any way that we can help elevate the voices and strategy to stop this project. Because I think the whole Rocky Mountains are under attack, and educating our next generation. And about 30, 40 years ago, we never had Navajo scientists at this level. And it's a whole new atmosphere now. Let's see, there's another question. People, Navajo EPA scientists and Jeep Tour Company have been taking soil and water samples in Blue Gap Touchy around the abandoned uranium claim site 28. Should community members be wary of this? Based on your presentation, I wouldn't be surprised if all this is in preparation for some type of extraction mentioned in this presentation.
I heard about that. Wendy, did you hear about that? Like I heard that I saw that somewhere, but I don't know if it's related to this project or not.
Well, our work of Shrek and UNM Metals, they have worked with the community of Blue Gap Tachi and in areas of looking at those contaminated um, areas of the water and the land and noting where they are with the community. And we visited there recently with the chapter and communities, and they did again bring the concern of water and and the impacts with those mines there. I didn't hear this question brought up from them, but like you said, in other ways, you know, people are see stuff too. So I just know DISA, as far as DISA goes, they work with the Navajo Nation EPA, and I think that's how those 3 sites were picked for them to do that first pilot study. And before knowing that, like asking, well, what next areas are going to be done with the phase 2, um, it was it took a lot to keep asking that, and they never quite pinpointed those things down, and then things just change around so fast. Like then hearing about this time critical removal with the Old Church Rock mine, but that was already a part with working with the Region 9 EPA there. So it's just a lot more transparency that needs to happen, and that with the communities that are there. So it's not just trying to fill in these, puzzle pieces. So they just need to be communicated.
Right, exactly. So I think, if people want to learn more or how we can maybe educate Durac at the next meeting, thank you for sharing those dates. And, also hearing from Redwater Pond community and how can we all collaborate together on this issue. And we look forward to having that discussion. And then also, everyone can do a letter to the editor, to Navajo Times or Gallup Independent, LA Times, any type of media journalists, environmental journalists that please share this with them, and any other scientists, because I don't think it's going to stop here at Navajo. I think if they're not selling their snake oil here, they'll sell it to other tribes, tribal nations, or even pueblos. So it's not just for us protecting our communities, our nation, our clans, but also other communities that might be under attack of this type of energy war that's so detrimental. Are there any other questions?
I have one. When's the next, do you have a date for the next webinar?
No, we don't.
Okay. February.
Yeah, it'll be February.
Great.
I think it's around the same time evening.
Anna, we got one question. It was, where is DISA going to get the water from for their project on Navajo? Do you know where they're going to get their water from?
They said they're trucking it in. They're bringing it in and bringing it out.
For the test, they trucked it in from Gallup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why we need to really keep an eye on all of these moving pieces. And what's lacking with this project is community support. I know the Resources Community Development Committee. I heard one of the delegates, Ricky Nez, really supports this project. And of course, he's a business person and he's an extractive industry supporter. So we really need folks like Danae Care, because they've been very good in educating the community, getting radio ads and op-eds and letters to the editor, mobilizing young people. Yes, so we really need to come up with a strategy to stop this, and I hope that we can get to the tribal council leadership and have them put a stop to this. Because anytime the tribe has to apply for federal money, or they have to do a resolution supporting, and then another one to accept the money, to support, to get the money, and then another one to accept the money. There's a big process in all this, and we just really need to keep track. It's not a done deal. There's ways that we could deconstruct this and not have it be a reality and another stressor for us again. 6 more minutes. Any closing comments or questions? Linda?
I would just like to thank everyone for inviting me to be here. And my closing comment would be that, I looked at this technology and I was praying that it would be a way to clean up waste, but it isn't. So when you hear the authorities or someone like the executive director of Navajo EPA say that they have sole authority to do this cleanup process, hold them to account, because this is not cleanup. What's being left behind is just more waste. And so it's just heartbreaking because it's extraction, it isn't cleanup. And maybe there will be a way to do this in the future that would clean it up and make the soil so you could garden and cook in it and whatever again. And that's what we hope for. But it's not this technology.
Mm-mm.
I want to give an update on the question about the Jeep Tour Company from a direct member. They shared their contracted by a Diné-led uranium cleanup contractor called Phase 2 Expanded Trust, and that's doing work out there. So you can look at the website of Navajo, amutrust2.org.
Yeah. I just want to make a comment too. We used to have a great Navajo EPA executive director, Sadie Hosky. And to run this by her, I know it would be surprising that, Navajo EPA is not created for business deals. They are not created to accept millions of dollars from a company to transport waste. They're not in the business of creating economic development. They're for regulatory treatment as a state. They need to act like one and protect the people. But yeah, I really want to thank Linda Williams for helping us put this webinar on, and with all your research, because we do have a website, and we do have a YouTube channel and an Instagram account and an email. So if folks want to find out any more information, right now it's better to follow us on Facebook, Dooda Disa, and we'll be getting a petition out, an electronic petition for Navajo, and I would say for others, because like Linda said, she's also fighting against nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. And so we don't even know if the uranium is going to be used for nuclear weapons. You know, we don't know what Raytheon's doing. There was a comment made on that topic. But yes, even making nuclear weapons is totally against our traditional teachings that are embedded in our bones, in our blood, in our land. And, you know, we call upon our ancestors, the holy people, changing woman, and to hold tightly that tutadine, the corn pollen. That is what's going to get us through this, is our ceremonies. And take care of yourselves, be vigilant, be fierce, and love one another in a beautiful way. And I believe we'll end right now. Ahead. Thank you. Dooda Disa. Say it. Woo!
Dooda
Dooda
Disa.
Disa. Ahead. Take care. Shrek. No
Aloha.
nuclear in Hawaii. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Hagwan.
Aloha.